Okay, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to share our Regional Integration Index, Asia Pacific Regional Cooperation Integration Index. Well, the Asia Pacific Regional Cooperation Integration Index, namely ARCII, has been introduced in 2016. We developed this index to take the form of a composite index, which is a weighted average of 6 dimension specific achievements in Asia and the Pacific. The ARCII helps us monitor the progress of regional integration in these 6 dimensions over time or against set goals. This also helps us identify strengths and weaknesses across different geographic regions and different dimensions. Regional integration, as we all know, is a multi-dimensional process. We categorized these 6 pillars that are known to be very important for regional cooperation integration. These 6 dimensions include trade, investment, money and finance, regional value chain, infrastructure and connectivity, movement of people, and finally, the institutional and social integration. The indicators we use to construct ARCII are already on the screen. There are 6 dimensions, and each dimension have at least 4 or 5 indicators. Total, we use about 626 indicators to create a composite index ARCII. When we construct this ARCII, we try to impute missing data through linear interpolation, averaging, regression, and substitution by closest available observation. And then we normalize these indicators because all of the indicators are slightly different in terms of their qualitative and then quantitative characteristics. So we use the panel min-max scaling with the percentile transformation to normalize each indicator. And we use 2-step panel principal component analysis to compute weights for each component and then aggregate them into a single composite index. In the first stage, we compute principal components to weight those indicators in each dimension. And then the second stage, we compute again the principal components for 6 dimensions to aggregate those 6-dimensional index into one single composite index for regional integration index. So this actually shows that where the missing values were and then how we use the imputation method to fill the gap in these database. So this is the latest ARCII that has been computed using the normalization across all around the world, all countries in the sample, and we compare Asia's regional integration vis-a-vis other regions, including the EU and Latin America, etc. So this the blue line shows the ASEAN's performance in ARCII. Compared to ASEAN, Asia also shows this fairly strong regional cooperation in trade investment, especially the infrastructure connectivity, and also the movement of people. And the ARCII compares better than the degree of regional integration in Africa. And this yellow shows Latin America. And then the gray shows regional integration for EU. As you can see, the EU performs better than Asia in all 6 dimensions. It actually performs much better in terms of institutional and social integration, movement of people, and the money and finance, and infrastructure, connectivity, etc. Regional integration index, we can actually see fairly stable over about 10 years, although the regional integration index for EU has been stable, yet a little slowing, while the regional integration index for Asia has made stable but a bit of progress over 10 years. This finding is also quite consistent with various other globalization or economic integration index that shows that the more advanced economies tend to have better degree of regional integration, but in the past several years, at least since the global financial crisis, more advanced economies have been stagnating in regional integration, while developing countries have made more progress in regional integration. In left-hand panel, you also see the contribution of 6 different dimensions for the overall regional integration index. And in Asia, the trade, investment, and movement of people show a strong contribution to this regional integration. And then compared to the EU, the money and finance integration and regional value chain, the money and finance integration, and then also the generally the institutional social tend to be lagging a bit behind in the integration measure in EU. So this actually shows that the sub-indexes for 6 dimensions, as already discussed, in all 6 dimensions, EU outperforms other regions in terms of the regional integration, but the Asia actually performs quite comparatively well in trade investment, even against the EU, and then it also performs quite well in other the measures such as infrastructure, connectivity, and also the movement of people. I'm going to actually turn it to the Rolando, who has been also taking this project to enhance the ARCII index. Rolando, you can continue from here.
Thank you very much. Let me just request control. So to continue with the presentation, what we want to present is the current improvements to enhance the ARCII index. Starting in 2019, we started a project for improving the quality and relevance of the index. And this had 3 main objectives. The first is to improve the methodology and the data quality of the index. This involves extending the dimensions and the indicators included in what we call now the baseline index, which Cyn-Young just presented, including the relevant dimensions to measure, and also filling the data gaps existent today because of the data imputation that we are doing to the current database. The second objective of this project is to support and to make the index more useful for the operations of ADB on regional cooperation and integration. And this involves consultation with the different departments who have used the index in the past and who have a demand for this type of indicators. So we are working with them in making this connection with their own priorities and needs more clear and more useful in the index. And the third objective is to produce relevant research through the use of the ARCII. We have done in the past studies analyzing, for example, the impact of regional integration on structural issues such as poverty and inequality. And we also want to expand also the type of analysis of a specific dimensions or a specific subregion where the dynamics of ARCII are deserve attention. Let me just go to the next slide. Cyn-Young, maybe you have to approve my request for. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so going, we saw that one of the big improvements that we want to do with the ARCII index is to fill some of the data gaps existent on the current structure. We already saw this is the current structure of the index. And now the proposed extensions that we are gonna present and that we are discussing today with our team are basically three. The first is to integrate new dimensions through the framework, and we will focus on two specific dimensions. The second one is to integrate new indicators on the existing dimensions and improve the quality of the data that we have. One of the particularities of the ARCII, as you may remember, is that we use bilateral data as much as possible, which makes the data more rich, but also more challenging in terms of data collection. And the third objective is to customize the ARCII index to specific regions or country groups. For the new dimensions, we are considering at the moment, and after consultation with the different users and departments that are access the index regularly, integrating two main dimensions. The first is on technology and digital connectivity, which basically wants to capture the role of ARCII through technology transfer, which means technology and ICT goods trade, intellectual property, and also digital connectivity as an important dimension. And this involves internet traffic, internet capacity, mobile and telecommunications, this type of indicators, which we will explain in detail. The second dimension that we are considering is on environmental sustainability. This involves the role of ARCII through trade in environmental goods, for example, ratification of environmental agreements and the ecological footprint of exports. We will present each of these at the moment. There are other dimensions that have been considered in our analysis, for example, and that were mentioned by the different departments working on the area. For example, air transportation. It's an area where we wanted to improve also the data, which is now considered part of ARCII. On power generation and distribution and energy flows, it's an important dimension for some of the sub-regions where we work. And the third one is related to the role of ARCII on natural disasters and regional public health initiatives such as vaccination programs. So let me show you what we are considering now for the first dimension. So let me show you the new indicators that we are considering on the existing dimensions. One of the drawbacks of the current version of the ARCII is on the money and finance integration dimensions, where we have some important data gaps, in particular related to indicators of capital markets, equity returns, and this type of bilateral indicators that we do not have for all the countries in the Asia region and actually worldwide, as we estimate the ARCII for all regions. For this, we are considering introducing two main indicators. One, to capture the capital account openness, which is a standard indicator of financial openness, the Cyn-Ito index, which is a country or national data indicator. And the second one is the correlations of exchange rates vis-a-vis the US dollar, which we intend to capture the level of financial integration within the countries once you have isolated the correlation with the dollar. We will explain some of this also later. We are also considering some variables that capture the banking-based systems in some of the countries. And for this, we have explored some of the indicators related to banking integration. Second, in the dimension of regional value chains, we are including now an indicator of value added, which basically captures the value added contributed by regional trading partners. And this is something that we didn't have in the previous version of the ARCII, but it's now available through the different data sets on value added, including TIVA, but also the ADB multi-regional input-output tables. We are also exploring to have a proxy for services trade, which is one of the areas where we could also capture better the data. On the fourth dimension, infrastructural connectivity, we will include information on international flight passenger capacity and the number of flights, which will capture this dimension of movement of people on a much more accurate basis. And finally, on institutional arrangements, we have the number of international intergovernment organizations as a proxy of the level of institutional integration that we will integrate in this dimension. So if we look at the new structure, this is more or less how the new indicator, the new ARCII will look. So we will have 8 instead of 6 dimensions, and we will include 2 new dimensions, the environmental cooperation and the digital and technology and digital connectivity, while the institutional arrangements and what used to be called the movement of people has been reorganized into these 2 new dimensions. If we go one by one on each of the different indicators, what we see in each dimension is that the trade and investment integration remains the same. We capture basically here intra-regional goods, exports and imports, and intensity of exports. On the money and finance integration, what we will have is these 2 new indicators for financial interconnectedness, and we will refrain from using the previously we used the equity returns indicator, but we had important data gaps in some regions, so we will capture this financial interconnection through these new indicators. In regional value chains, on gray, we have the standard indicators of the ARCII, and on green, we have the indicator on the value added, as I explained. And on infrastructure, we will add, as mentioned here in green, the proportion of passenger seats that will capture this type of regional integration in terms of flight transportation. On the new dimensions, the first one will be the technology and digital connectivity. Here we have basically 3 families of indicators. One capturing technology transfer, which is basically the proportion of intra-regional ICT goods and high technology goods trade. Again, as you remember, all the ARCII indicators are calculated as a ratio between the region and the rest of the world. Second, we will have indicators on research and patents and different intellectual property indicators, which will capture this type of integration in terms of collaboration for research and development. And third, we will have the digital and telecommunication indicators, which are bilateral indicators reflecting, for example, the internet bandwidth between countries, the internet traffic, the proportion of mobile calls, and the ratio between the average internet bandwidth and traffic with the region and the world. So basically, this will be the structure, 3 type of indicators to form this technology dimension. On the people and social integration, which used to be the movement of people dimension, basically what we have updated is the indicator on the proportion of intra-regional inbound and outbound migration, which was already considered, but we were not including the outbound migration before. And also we are including 2 indicators of cultural trade, which basically is the proportion of intra-regional cultural goods and services trade to capture this type of social integration. On the institutional arrangements, again, we just add the number of international intergovernmental organizations in which a country is a member. And finally, on the new dimension of environmental cooperation, we have 2 indicators to reflect environmental trade. Basically, what we capture as the intra-regional environmental goods trade, and the proportion of intra-regional natural resources trade. And second, we have environmental outcomes, in which we are including, for now, the number of environmental agreements ratified, the CO2 emissions per capita, and the ecological footprint of import and exports as share of biocapacity. Just a brief mention on the data. The most innovative data that we are introducing in this new version is bilateral data on internet capacity and bandwidth, which is very rich because it reflects what is the traffic and the capacity at the country level. We also have the historical internet bandwidth for a large number of countries. Second, the data on on-flight origins and destinations that I mentioned before. We have also improved on we have a variable on double taxation treaties that we will try to exploit better and to also have a bit more granularity for the different countries. And for this, we are accessing a new database on the double taxation treaties. And finally, the global footprint network, which gives us data on ecological footprint. Finally, the third part of this project involves also trying to customize the ARCII to new needs. So at the moment, we have the established baseline index of ARCII, which has been already collected over 3 or 4 years and since 2006. Now what we want to expand is adopt some of the specific needs of our regional departments and also other institutions who are interested to looking at the ARCII dynamics in different country groups. One example of this is the estimation of the Eurasia index that we are doing at the moment, in which we are excluding some of the monetary and financial integration variables. And also what we want is to include some of the specific indicators which are interesting for some regions, for example, South Asia, which is interested on the energy flows dimension. So this construction of intra-subregional indexes and customized will allow us to tell and construct a better story in terms of the dynamics of regional cooperation and integration. So just to summarize, what we are doing is basically, 1, expanding the relevant dimensions, including technology and digital connectivity and environmental sustainability as the main candidates to enter the new framework. Second, to improve the indicators for existing dimensions. And third, to customize the ARCII to the needs of regions and subregions and try to reflect better also their specific priorities in the estimation of the index. As next steps, we are currently in the improvement of the methodology and the data collection phase. We have now the inception workshop in which we hope to get a lot of feedback in how to improve this first proposal for the framework. And what we will be doing are some regional workshops on ARCII measurement in some specific subregions in Asia. We will be also designing some research inputs and having contributions from international consultants. And finally, we hope to have a seminar with all the colleagues and the different teams involved in ARCII measurement to present this work and share the knowledge with all of you. I'll stop here. So thank you very much. And over to you, Cyn-Young.
Hi. Okay. Thank you. Well, I think